He had been carrying that bag for 30 years. Nobody knew what was inside. The young people thought it was just old dusty papers. Until the bag opened, and what came out silenced everyone. The morning mist hung low over downtown Toronto as 72-year-old Henry Blackwood pushed through the glass doors of Maple Leaf Cafe. His weathered leather bag, the same one he'd carried for 3 decades, hung from his shoulder like a faithful companion. "Morning, Mr. Blackwood," called Sarah Chen, the cafe owner, her voice warm with genuine affection. "The usual?" Henry nodded, settling into his corner table, the one with the worn wooden surface and the perfect view of Yonge Street. Same seat every day for the past 5 years since his retirement from the Toronto Herald. At the table across from him, 3 university students huddled over their MacBooks. Jake Morrison, a journalism major with perfectly styled hair and designer clothes, glanced at Henry with barely concealed disdain. "Look at that old guy," Jake whispered to his friends Emma Walsh and Connor Phillips, "still carrying around that ancient bag like he's some important reporter or something." Emma giggled, not bothering to lower her voice. "Probably has his old newspaper clippings in there. You know how these boomers are, living in the past." Connor leaned back in his chair, studying Henry with the arrogance of youth. "I bet he doesn't even know how to use Instagram. Meanwhile, my last post got 50,000 views. That's real journalism now." Henry's fingers tightened slightly around his coffee cup, but he said nothing. He'd heard it all before. In their eyes, he was just another relic from a bygone era, a man who'd been made obsolete by the digital age. "Excuse me, sir," Jake called out, his voice dripping with fake politeness. He stood up and approached Henry's table, his friends following like eager disciples. "We're journalism students at University of Toronto. Mind if we ask you a few questions?" Henry looked up from his newspaper, the actual paper version, not the digital one. "I suppose that depends on what you want to know." "Well," Jake grinned, pulling out his iPhone, "we're doing a project on how journalism has evolved. You know, how the old ways just don't work anymore. How real journalists today need to adapt or become irrelevant." Emma stepped forward, her smile sharp as a blade. "What we're really curious about is, what's in that bag? Old stories that nobody cares about anymore?" Connor laughed. "Bet it's full of rejection letters, or maybe interviews with people who've been dead for 20 years. Henry set down his newspaper slowly, methodically. His pale blue eyes met each of theirs in turn. "You want to know what's in the bag?" "Absolutely," Jake said, already composing his social media post in his head. "When we asked this old reporter what was in his bag, you won't believe what happened next." Henry reached for the bag with steady hands. The leather was cracked and worn, bearing the scars of countless journeys across continents and through decades. As he unzipped it, the cafe seemed to grow quieter, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. The first thing he pulled out was a faded photograph, black and white, slightly torn at the edges. It showed a mass grave in what appeared to be a rural setting, bodies piled like discarded dolls, the earth stained dark. Emma's smile faltered. "What? What is that?" Henry's voice was quiet, steady. "Rwanda, 1994. The genocide. I was there when they uncovered this particular site, near Nyarabuye. 800 people, mostly women and children." He set the photograph on the table and reached back into the bag. This time he pulled out a recording device, an old-fashioned one with actual tape. The last words of General Philippe Morillon before Srebrenica fell. July 10th, 1995. He knew what was coming. 7,000 men and boys would be dead within the week. Jake's mouth had gone dry. You were, you were in Bosnia? For 3 years. Henry's hands moved to another item. A small metallic object. A bullet casing. This one missed me by 2 inches in Grozny. December 1999. The Chechen War. The sniper who fired it. He was 14 years old. Connor stepped back involuntarily. Jesus! But Henry wasn't finished. He pulled out a press credential, laminated but yellowed with age. The photograph showed a much younger version of himself. Black hair instead of gray, no lines around the eyes, but the same steady gaze. BBC war correspondent, Emma read aloud, her voice barely a whisper. 23 years, Henry confirmed. Afghanistan, Iraq, Somalia, Sierra Leone, East Timor, Kosovo. He paused, his fingers touching another photograph. This one's from Cambodia. 1998, the last of the Khmer Rouge trials. I interviewed Pol Pot 2 weeks before he died. Sarah Chen had stopped pretending to work behind the counter. Other customers had turned to listen, their conversations forgotten. The weight of history had settled over the small cafe like morning fog. Henry pulled out a manila folder, thick with documents. These are testimonies. Survivors' accounts from places that most people can't find on a map. Places where genocide wasn't just a word in history books, it was Tuesday morning. His weathered fingers traced the edge of another photograph. This one was in color, but the subject made it more horrifying than any black and white image could be. A young girl, maybe 7 years old, staring directly into the camera. Her eyes held an emptiness that spoke of unspeakable trauma. Her name was Amara, Henry said softly. I found her in a refugee camp in Sierra Leone, 2001. The Revolutionary United Front had cut off both her hands with machetes. She drew this picture for me with a pencil held in her teeth. He showed them a child's drawing, crude but unmistakably depicting violence, stick figures with red scrawls for blood. She died of malaria 6 months later. But her story reached 43 countries when I published it. It helped bring international attention to what was happening there. Jake's iPhone had long since been lowered. His hands were shaking slightly. I didn't know. Of course you didn't, Henry replied, not unkindly. Why would you? Your generation gets its news in 140-character summaries. You think journalism is about going viral, about getting likes and shares. You've never had to watch a mother bury her children, or listen to a father describe how soldiers made him choose which of his sons would live. Henry reached deeper into the bag, his movements more deliberate now. When his hand emerged, it held a small, elegant box. The kind used for jewelry, but heavier somehow. This, he said, opening it carefully, is why I never talk about the bag. Inside, nestled in velvet, was a medal, gold and pristine despite its age. The inscription read, Pulitzer Prize for International Reporting, Henry James Blackwood, 1995. The cafe fell completely silent. The Srebrenica story, Henry explained. My coverage helped expose the systematic nature of the massacre. It was evidence in the war crimes trials at The Hague. Connor's face had gone pale. You won a Pulitzer? 2, actually. Henry reached back into the bag and pulled out another box. This one was for the series on child soldiers in Liberia, 2003. Those articles led to UN Resolution 1612, which established the monitoring and reporting mechanism on children in armed conflict. Emma sat down heavily in the nearest chair. Why didn't you ever say anything? Why didn't anyone know? Henry's smile was sad, but understanding. Because the stories were never about me. They were about Amara, and Milos in Kosovo, and Fatima in Afghanistan, and David in Rwanda. The moment you make it about the journalist, you've lost the point entirely. There's more, Henry said quietly, and somehow that simple statement carried more weight than any dramatic pronouncement could have. He pulled out a photograph that made everyone in the cafe take a sharp breath. It showed a man in military uniform shaking hands with Henry. The man's face was instantly recognizable from history books and documentaries. General Ratko Mladic, Henry said, the butcher of Bosnia. I interviewed him in 1995, 3 months before Srebrenica. He told me, on record, that there would be consequences for the UN peacekeepers if they didn't withdraw. I was the last Western journalist to speak with him before he went into hiding. Jake leaned forward, his earlier arrogance completely evaporated. Did you know? Did you know what he was planning? I suspected. The signs were all there. But suspicion isn't evidence. And in war zones, rumors are as common as bullets. Henry's fingers traced the edge of the photograph. I filed 3 stories warning about the deteriorating situation. The last one ran on July 6, 1995. 5 days later, Srebrenica fell. He pulled out another image, this one showing him in a flak jacket, notebook in hand, standing beside a refugee convoy. The background showed burning buildings and smoke-filled skies. Kosovo, 1999. I was embedded with the KLA for 6 weeks. These aren't just photographs, they're evidence. Every face, every burned house, every mass grave. I documented it all because I knew that someday someone would try to deny it happened. That evening, Jake Morrison deleted his Instagram account. Emma Walsh changed her major from digital media to international relations. Connor Phillips spent the night researching refugee crises and UN peacekeeping missions. And in a small apartment overlooking Lake Ontario, Henry Blackwood sat at his desk, the leather bag beside him, writing. Not for publication, not for recognition, but for the voices that still whispered to him in the dark. Because bearing witness never ends. Because the stories must be told.